Alright, gonna get started and hopefully we have some more show up. I have a replay here from Snail that he asked me to go through, so I will start with that. It's PvP on Fighting Spirit. He said he went for a 2-gate, scouted late, went into a 3-gate goon, and got a contain, but then lost on the breakout. So we'll take a look at that. So normally, if you are going for a 2-gate from the beginning, you'll put your gateways as close to the ramp as you can, or not as close as you can, but relatively close. So it's only a few seconds, but for this kind of aggression, it matters. So it's worth considering putting your gates a little lower here. Okay, all standard so far. You didn't scout, okay. Normally you'll scout on gate if you're doing a 10-12 gate, because you'll know the position right when your first zealot comes out. You'll know that they're in the last position at worst. So you always want to scout after gate. It's okay to bully the probe. Yeah, that's good. Setting it back, that's good. Yeah, so we don't know where their opponent is. We don't know if he's proxying or doing macro play or what, because it's important to know, because obviously we want to pressure as early as possible, but it's also important because if our opponent's 2-gating, then, and say doing a 9-9 in base or at nat, or especially in the middle, then we want to stay defensive. Proxy in the middle would be hitting now, and your zealot, or not now, but in a few seconds with 3 zealots. And your zealot is out on the map, so they could push in and get an advantage. So the scouting is important here, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Manor pylon is annoying. Yeah, I don't like sitting a zealot there. At this point, I mean, the opponent is ahead. Like, it feels like nothing's happened, but your opponent is ahead just because of your build choice here and your lack of scouting. You are ahead on probes. I think that's just because he's cutting, but okay. So generally speaking, when you're doing a 2-gate opening, you either want to do Peru gates or a 3-zealot push. So the 3-zealot push, you would open up exactly as you did, except you're going to cut. You're going to cut zealots after 3. Instead of this pylon, you make a 21 gas, and then I think it's a 23 cybernetics core, and then you add your pylon on 24. The idea with it is 3 zealots is a good amount of pressure. You can sneak in, you can scout what your opponent's doing, since they should be adding tech while those 3 zealots push in. You can get some probe kills, etc. So that's a really clean version of the build. There's a post on Team Liquid where they talk a lot about the merits and how to execute the build. So if you're going to do a 2-gate into tech style, I highly recommend that. The other way to execute the build is to Peru gate, which is taking your natural with Forge. So I don't do that much, but I know you basically will cut zealots at a time where you notice there's no way you're going to do any more damage. You'll add a Forge and get your Nexus pylon, and then add cannons to survive against whatever your opponent's doing. I don't do it much in the Peru gates. I may have done it like twice ever, but generally those are the 2 ways to play. Getting a late gas like you did here is just behind. I mean, you don't get to do damage with this because your zealots are hitting so late, and they can do damage. We'll have to watch, but getting your gas this late means your tech is extremely behind the opponent, whereas getting a gas on 21, you're not as far behind. Hey, at least I'm going through Snail's rep now. So, yeah, so basically either go into tech earlier or instead go for Peru gates, I think is the key. The delayed action here was rough. Because now you can see you're making goons, but your range is going to be super late, or you're going to have to make a bunch of zealots, and it's just not going to work out nicely. So again, no range. Hope to eventually get range. So here he pushes out, which is a mistake, just because he knows that you had 2 gates, so you're going to outproduce him since he was only on 1 for a long time. So him pushing out was a mistake. Have you gotten range? Still no range. Okay. That's a big deal. I mean, range is absolutely huge in PvP. So here we have a contain. Okay, so okay, now you start range. That's good. It's super late, but it's at least starting. So we have a contain, and that's always good, but the important thing to remember is that your opponent is locked in to one base, so you need to react accordingly. And that sounds kind of silly, but it's very easy to screw that up. Meaning you get too greedy on the back end. So the thing you have to think about all the time when you have a contain in PvP is he is going to be building 2 or 3 gates plus most likely either Reaver tech or Dark Templar tech. And in both situations, you can barely cut anything. You have to really maintain your hold here if you want to maintain the hold. So here, I guess what I'm getting is you can't get too greedy when it comes to contain like this. So you take your Nexus, which is good, but then you have to keep making out of these gates in order to maintain your hold here. Right now you're not. I know there's a bunch of action, and I'll go back and look at it, but the lack of macro here is problematic. So, alright, so let's watch the engage here. So, you know the ways that a Protoss can break out of a contain, if you are in the contain. They can Reaver push, which is hard to do down a ramp, so typically they'll wait for a shuttle, and they'll either drop out here and push this way, and then while you're distracted, they'll rush down the ramp, or they'll drop in this corner here and try to push out that way, so they have Reavers over here, which screws up your arc, and then push down the ramp. They can just go for DT, because obviously you did a 3 gate here, so if they rush for DT tech, then you would have had to go for a robo behind this, which is a totally legitimate way to play, but a lot of players go for a Nexus after. So DT will help you break out. The other way is for them to get Zealot speed, which I quite like, actually. So you can just get like 4 to 6 Zealots, rush down with the Zealots, and then push out with the goons shortly thereafter. So all of those have some level of extra tech, right? Like they have not just Dragoons, because Dragoons can't break out. So you have to be aware of what they're doing, basically. If they go for Reavers, they don't have to push down. They can just rush over and drop. They can just sit in their base and drop you. And because you're holding a contain and have nothing at home, you can just lose the game because you are out of probes. Same with a DT drop. They could just drop a DT out on your base and you lose the game. So I guess what I'm getting at is contains are hard to maintain, so you should always be thinking of when to retreat from your contain. So hold it as long as you can, but then just remember that once his tech kicks in, you are at a disadvantage and need to defend if you're being greedy at home, basically. So we want to hold this ramp, obviously, but you don't have range. How long is your range away? Yeah, your range is way far away from finishing. So you want your arc to be such that right when he pushes down the ramp here, you engage, which is awkward without range, but that's the general idea. So you want your arc to be right here and just sit in this arc, and right when he pushes out, you engage. I think, yeah, so right here, you're not in position. He gets to push down his ramp here, and you don't want that. Works out okay for you because he still doesn't have his Reaver, but for that point, you want it to be sitting in an arc like this. Push him with his ramp. You don't want to go up the ramp, especially when you see the Reaver. Right when you see the Reaver, you need to back it up. Because Reaver clumps are... see, you traded really poorly there. If you had just sat with an arc here, then he has to take his Reaver and slowly push it forward, and then you can pressure the Reaver because he either has to have his Dragoons right here to try to defend it, which means that the Reaver is going to die, or he has to have his goons back here, meaning his Reaver is alone, so you can run up and snipe it or at least pressure it. So this push right here where you tried to run up and snipe the Reaver, it's unfortunate that he had one hit left, but the damage would have been done either way. Even if this Reaver died, that still was not that good of a trade for you. Because he's powering off of one base and you have a Nexus. You're ahead in eco. So you don't want to trade army. You want to defend your eco. So holding the arc here is kind of the critical part of that. So at this point, you haven't been making probes as well as your opponent, which is a big deal. I guess you're resuming now. But your eco is slightly better because of the expansion, but again, your probe count's pretty poor. I like retreating all the way. I mean, because you had those losses. But you have to remember, so you know he has a Reaver, so obviously he can drop you at some point. So really you should be in position with goons here and here ready to catch. And then you should either put a probe or a goon in front of the opponent so that you can see if they're pushing out, so then you can pull these goons back to the front to defend. But for now, the only threat you have is a drop, so have them in position already. There's no reason not to have your goons over here. Okay. Are you going for legs, or are you going for Templar tech? Okay, you got them in position now, that's good. Okay, so you're going for legs. Okay, I don't mind that. Typically you want to get your robo before getting into the forge and the citadel, because you really need to have observers in PvP, partially because of drops like this. If you have an observer here, it's much easier to defend drops since your goons can shoot further instead of being locked by this wall. And just to see what your opponent's doing, because you need to see when they add gates and when they move out, etc. So the row is really important, and actually, honestly, going Reaver from here is still totally legitimate as well. You don't have to go straight for Templar attack here. You can go for Reaver, and that's totally acceptable. I prefer that way, to be honest. I like to get Reaver in this situation. Okay, so the shuttle comes in, you don't notice it. On Fighting Spirit, this little gap right here is invisible to you because of the ridge. So either you need to have an observer out here so that you have something high, or you have a flying unit that lets you see, or you have to have goons both here and in this little section right here to catch the shuttle. So obviously you missed that here, and that's rough. But I mean, he hasn't done crazy damage. Ultimately, the problem is that you weren't and still aren't making probes. So you're at 26 probes when you really should be at, even with the harass, you should probably be at 35 plus right now and be even with him. Actually, you'd be ahead because you have a second Nexus up and he doesn't. So I think the probe production is an issue. Cannons are fine. You don't want to make cannons this early because you have Dragoons to do that job, and cannons are better spent on probes and gateways. But if you don't have the multitask, it's fine. Yeah, there's our Robo. Robo this late is rough. So here you're behind significantly, but it doesn't have anything to do with the contain. I mean, you did throw away some units here, but during the contain, if you were making probes, and at this point if you were making probes, you would be miles ahead of him. Like even with the harass, it would have been totally fine. But the probe production is a problem. Okay, so now you're safe versus drops. You still don't know what he's doing though. So at this point he could have cut probes hard and gone for 6 gateways and be preparing for a push, or he could have a third by now. You have no idea because your Robo was so late. Turns out he's doing something kind of middle of the road, which is probably good for you, but ooh, he's got 4 Reavers. This wall here is actually bad for you, on Fighting Spirit specifically. On most maps probably, but Fighting Spirit specifically for a push like this, I mean obviously he has overwhelming numbers, so it's going to be hard either way, but generally you want to engage at the bridge, which means you want your arc to be here and here, so that when he pushes in and has this clump here, you can have the biggest arc possible. PvP engagements are almost entirely Reaver shots, Storm, and arcs. That's basically the 3 things that actually determine how fights go. So in this scenario, you don't have Reavers and you don't have Templar, so you have to rely on a really nice arc in order to get the best possible engagement. So here the game, I assume, is over. Still have a couple minutes, but I assume he's going to take out your net here. Yeah. So really, I think the big things are your build here, your 2-gate pressure. I think you need to decide what your follow-up is. If you're gonna, you can go all in by just going 2-gate in the main, and then like manor pylons, shield batteries, proxy gates, you know, the whole shebang. That's totally fine. You can do a Peru gates follow-up, or you can do a 21 gas follow-up. But I think anything else is just suboptimal. So that's one issue. The next issue is with the contain here. Don't run up the ramp. Your advantage during the contain is the choke. That is your advantage. So you need to have an arc around that choke and force him to stay in as long as you can. And then the third thing is your probe production. That's huge. That's probably the biggest reason why you lost this game, actually. More than the contain and more than the 2-gate was the probe production. So that's something you need to focus on. Okay. I see crazy, but you're not a Protoss.
You can still teach me.
I could teach you Protoss if you have Protoss questions. I cannot teach you Terran, though.
I do not. I have not played Protoss in quite a while.
Okay,
I'm just hanging out.
cool.
Opposition research.
We're on the same team.
No, it's how to beat Protoss.
Ah, gotcha. Yeah, I don't know. Usually I lose myself. I throw away my army against Terran and lose the game. That's usually how I lose PvTs.
Hey, that's how I lose that matchup too.
Nice. First couple weeks I did this, I always had like 4 or 5 people in chat and we were talking and sharing reps and everything, but man, these last couple weeks it's just been one person usually. So
Well, we hope that's because everyone's winning, right?
that's
Maybe you're just doing
hope.
a good job.
Or maybe they've decided that this is useless. I don't know. I guess I'll stop the recording here, and this will be for Snail, but